Right, okay, so we've got chat up, we've got all that good, excellent. Oh, I've got to plug that in as well, so make sure I've got a, no, I don't have an HDMI cable.
Oh, you don't have it? Oh, yeah,
I don't have my HDMI cable, so, hey, HDMI cable that I could borrow quickly, otherwise I have to run back to my office and grab my HDMI cable, because that's the one thing I forgot. I got internet, but so the stream is hearing me, but I don't specifically need to put that up on there. He's bringing one now anyway, so that's all good. Right, so today I was gonna I was having a look at quality, and we got a couple of people, software quality and testing, partly because on Wednesday we had a visit. I had Runa Runa from Vixel, I forget his last name. Anyway, he was in, and we were discussing software development, software engineering, and one of the things that he was saying is that our master's students working in virtual reality were actually getting more done than the Harmer guys, because they generally bring in artists and modelers, and we have programmers. And in that discussion, he was saying they'd brought on some junior programmers from Harmer, but they were a bit surprised that those junior programmers didn't know what version control was, or how to do any kind of software testing. And he said, and so there's quite a lot for them to kind of bring those guys up to speed on what a professional development environment looks like. And so as part of that, we had a discussion on testing and testing environments, and the kind of testing that they're doing. And so I thought, also with Benjamin asking me about QA, that I could do a little sort of a follow-up on some of the discussions we had on testing. Apparently I'm not allowed to view it at this scale. Okay, testing. So under the testing, I added a few more discussions on testing, and some of the things you could do, and I posted that in the link. And understanding software testing is, a whole degrees on software engineering, where you get large numbers of courses which are just about testing methodologies and testing frameworks. And so I was looking around for what are good resources, and so I found the Guru 99 stuff. This particular page, and I think, yeah, I'm assuming the right place. So the Guru 99, it had a reasonable section on testing. I had looked through some of these, and some of the idea of how you do different testing in different environments. And so as tutorials and places to learn some more stuff, also as you write up your bachelor thesis, you can use reference some of the stuff to see what kind of testing you've been doing. So it starts with the kind of free course on learning software testing, which I thought, and I went through and said, yep, no, those seem like good tutorials, and I was scanning through some of them and reading through some of them, and they give you a reasonably good insight. So I thought I'd give you the links to those, and yeah, how to test in an agile environment. So what does your test plan look like? So you have an iteration, and yep, release, in game, and production, and then your agile testing strategy cycles there. And so yeah, it goes through a description of various methodologies for testing, right? Now often hopefully you guys have been doing some testing, and one of the nice things is trying to find the right software name for it. Right? So even if you haven't kind of done it the way you technically should, which is you find the methodology and then apply it, you can also have worked out a methodology that works for you, and then find what the industry calls that thing. Right? And it can also give you some tips. And you know, you've still got 3 weeks. Is it 3 weeks? 3 weeks today? The 16th? Is the submission date for the thesis? So, and we're the week after the 22nd is when I'm expecting the professional programming stuff to come in. Right? So the idea is after you've finished your thesis, you can then do a bit of reflection and writing on professional, the professional programming, or proprof.md, which in the repos you're working in, I expect that file. So you submit into Blackboard the link to that file, and then I can go into that repo, have a look at the file, and that will link me to your code and your work. So for development testing, I think some of the interesting things, unfortunately Guru99 keeps popping up ads at you, so sorry, you'll just have to ignore that. But if you look at actually no, I think it was in this one, because I went through a couple of them, this tutorial on the software development lifecycle versus the software testing lifecycle. And in here, as it says, you know, so relative cost to fix a bug when having detected that a bug exists, the cost to fix it. You know, if you find it during the requirements phase, you just change the requirements. But once you've released it, like for games, we do lots of patching, and in fact you often find that a game, like I remember, now I use Steam, but when we actually were buying games on DVDs or CDs, there was a period for about 5 to 10 years where you'd buy the DVD, you'd put it in, the first thing it would do is download all the patches that had been created since they made the DVD. Right? So the DVD was more kind of like a ticket to spend an hour downloading, or 2 hours downloading gigs of data to try and actually get the current version of the game. For car companies, right, when you've got to recall 100,000 cars to fix a problem in software, which is why Tesla has over-the-air updates, so they don't have to recall them when they want to change sort of some of the packages. But regardless of that, the mere structural cost of dealing with a bug late is much more expensive, right? So the idea is if you can get tests early, you can catch bugs earlier and fix them more cheaply. And so that's what this V model is that, you know, at each kind of depth of development, there is an associated testing and QA system, right? So the overall system requirements have overall testing matched up, right? So you can, and the software development lifecycle comes down one side of the V, and the software testing lifecycle is down the other side. And you can have a separate testing team to a development team, right? So you have a team who are specifying thing and writing tests for it, and you have the development team satisfying those tests, right? You can actually have them as separate teams. Often you will have them all in the one team, right? Because they work together quite a lot. But if you're outsourcing, you usually outsource the development rather than the testing, right? Because if you are trying to comply with legislation, if you're trying to comply with Norwegian legislation or GDPR, it's the testing bit of that gives you the stamp of yes, we've tested it, we know that it's okay. And you don't really want to outsource that to India because they might not have the same regulations, so they might not test it properly, and so certification becomes very important. So I thought, you know, if you are interested in the QA end of things, then I certainly Would suggest reading through a bunch of this material. I liked the approach that Guru 99 took. I was having a look around and looking at various courses and software engineering models. Apart from the advertising, it takes a relatively hands-on case study based approach to testing. Right? So it felt more like what we try and do. And each of these types of testing and test cases and there's a full course worth of stuff to read here, right? So you could dig in and extract bits that you're interested in. The whole white box testing, performance testing. So if there are questions that you guys have, you can also ask me about any of these areas, and we can discuss them. If you look at performance testing, I assume, let's see, you can understand overall performance is how well things behave. So load testing, you know what load testing is? Can you guess what load testing is? No. So load testing is when you have a network or you have a system, you put large amounts of users through or large amounts of test data, right? So what is the maximum load it can take? And stress, so load is quantity and stress is generally speed, right? So stress testing is you give it like lots of suddenly volumes of data, whereas load is how much data you give it. And they also have volume testing as a separate activity to load testing. So I think you'll find that they all kind of link to each other a bit. Why load testing? Load testing gives confidence in the system's reliability and performance. Right? So it kind of does both of those. Volume testing, scalability testing, how it scales up. What is a soak test? Actually, I don't know what a soak test is. Stability testing, spike testing, again, like what happens if you suddenly get a massive spike in data. And then the difference between testing versus load testing versus so it tries to explain those. So soak testing. Any idea what soak testing might be? Let's have a look. Soak testing is non-functional testing in which the system under load is tested and verified so that it can withstand a huge volume of the load for an extended period of time. Soak testing is nothing but a type of performance testing. Okay, so it is lots of data for a long time, unlike spike testing, which is lots of data for a short time. Okay, so yep, and then they have an explanation of that. Behave normally for 2 hours, because one of the things you guys often forget in testing is so testing a system that's been running for a while and that it has done some stuff, and you've gone into a thing and then come back and then left it running for a while and then tried another menu option and come back, because usually what mostly what you guys are doing is you do some development, you test that thing, and then you quit and you do some more development and you start it up again fresh, and each time it's coming in fresh. And so although you test each of the functions, you test them from a fresh build as this is the first time I've gone and do something. My favourite example of us being burned by that was the way Flash used to operate. So you guys remember Adobe Flash? Vaguely. So the Flash web player, classes were in global scope. Right? So when you loaded a program, it loaded all the classes into global namespace. Even if you gave them namespaces, it still loaded those classes into global namespace. So long, and when you quit, it would empty its memory. However, you could load sub shockwave files, right? So you could actually load. So we had a menu with lots of different games in it, right? And so you run up the menu and you choose a game, and it would load that game in, right? And so we'd individually be loading the menu, loading our game, testing our game, everything fine, right? And then one of the tests was, you load in someone else's game, then you quit that game, back to the menu, and then you load in your game. And sometimes that was fine, sometimes it wasn't. because when it loaded in the first game, there was a utils class, which has been named utils. And they had their utils class and we had our utils class. Most of the functions were identical. Most of them. Except one, which, you know, you'd only use occasionally. And if you loaded that particular game before yours, because it got in there first, it was the utils class, and your game used its utils class, which for most of the things we'd shared the utils class, so it's fine, except one function where we had implemented it slightly differently, which meant occasionally it would do something weird and not load properly because the util wasn't quite doing what we expected. That took us a while to hunt down, and so we developed a what we called a nuke from orbit function, which is when we exited a game, we went through and explicitly deleted every class out of the namespace that had been created. So we kind of made sure we cleaned up the space after it exited, so that when we loaded a new game, we'd actually get the proper files. But that takes a lot to find, right? And unfortunately, those sort of interactions are the ones that are kind of the meanest and the hardest to actually hunt down, because it wasn't something we did; it was something that was happening in the operating system that we didn't understand until we found the problem, and then we had a workaround. But the question I had about psychrometric complexity. Do you guys know what psychrometric complexity is? Did you have a look at it? I told you to look at it. Did you look at it? Did anybody look at it? No. But you know what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you talk about how many paths there are to a function.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you so it gives this idea of nodes and edges, and I think this is a nice example of the sequence. You have kind of just a sequence. A while loop, there is an extra complexity. If statements have branching complexity, and so when you have branches, you are going to increase complexity, right? So that's the diagram there where it kind of looks for all of the unique paths through without looping. The challenge of it, and it says the test coverage should at least give each of the paths, right? So if I have an if statement, if I'm going to cover, I need to have at least one path that goes down the true side of that if, and one path that goes down the false side of that if, to cover the program. Right? The challenge is, if your if statement is based on a range, it may not be enough to test one true and one false. You might have to test false low and false high and a true in the middle, right? Because otherwise you've not actually tested the if statement properly. So although your psychrometric complexity might give you a 4, and so you think, well, 4 tests will be enough, then no. Like, that's the bare minimum of tests to get one check through each pathway, right? And a for loop, you might not just want to check what happens when I give it 1, what happens when I give it 0. You might want to check the upper bound, as well as the lower bounds and things. But it gives you this idea of how much testing should I do at a bare minimum of each function. Because usually in program you don't give the whole program psychrometric complexity, you give like an average per function to say, like, how complex are your functions. But it's a measure, it's a number. But all kinds of measures of your code can be useful. If you are using our Git repo, we have under our cop CSE, so if you go to GitHub, and I sign in, remember who I am, okay. One of the things that I have in here under the COP CSE, Computer Science Education, is Git Inspector. Git Inspector generates a bunch of statistics around your Git repo, including doing code complexity analysis. So you get Psychrometric Complexity is one of the stats it does. It also looks at how you've been using your Git repository. It was created by, it probably sees someone here, Chalmers University and Gothenburg University, as a way of doing assessment of student repositories. So, but it generates a data about how the repository has been used, who's been committing, what percentage of commits they've done, when they were committing, and the complexity of the code they were committing. So if you want to run that over your code, it's another way of analyzing your code independently of the way that GitHub and Bitbucket does it. It's another tool, and so you can measure in other ways. Okay, so I was just wanting to bring up that. Any questions about testing? Have you guys done any testing? You've been doing some testing? That's good for your bachelor theses. The externals like when our students test things. This is a good thing. So QA, if you're a game developer, getting into QA is one of the pathways into game design. Because if you're on those two tracks, because you interact to test something, you have to understand what it is, and so you can give feedback to the design process. So if you're interested in moving up, sometimes getting more involved in the testing framework can help you move up in the requirements analysis and into some higher status positions. Because certainly in companies like BMW and some of the big companies who worry about their reputation, having good QA people who make sure you release products that work is actually more higher status than some of the developers, because developers just make it work, QA people make sure it works. So yeah, it kind of depends on the industry, but QA can actually have a higher status in some companies. So okay, so I was going to do a code review for people as well. So who sent me an email? So you guys sent an email. No, someone sent an email saying they had some code. You guys have some code. Excellent. We can do you a code review. Now would be great. Right, so it's now 56. So we'll take a 5-minute break and come back, and we'll set you guys up. Do you want to do it from here, or do you want to come from there, or come over here? Yeah, if you come over here, that'll be easy. Cool. Okay. See you guys.
Yeah, if there's time left, I can show a function to code review afterwards.
Yeah,
that's one thing. Other thing, can you publish a paper that says what actually do we need to deliver at